Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of the South Feminist Futures Festival. It's really been an amazing week. And we're starting the day with three amazing women who we will introduce. This is the second session, actually, under the same title that we had, Women Defending the Commons. And Carmen is on her way. I think she facilitated the last session, I think it was on Wednesday. And we wanted to come back to the theme, think about it, because it's really important for us to think about issues of climate justice, of rurality, and of rural women as really very much being at the center of any kind of South Feminist Futures project. I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that the title comes from the Pacific, Women Defending the Commons. It's a diva for equality who have a campaign under that idea, under that title. But I think it resonates so well with everything that we think about in terms of development. We have two. So what I'm going to ask first, this is going to be very laid back kind of interview. We want lots of people to participate. I think that there may be a couple of points around the housekeeping. We have interpretation in Spanish, English, interpretation in Spanish, English, Portuguese, and French. If you look at your screen at the bottom, you'll see a little icon that looks like a globe of the world where it says interpretation. So you will pick the language of your choice to get the interpretation, and in the chat also that is being provided. So what I'd like to do first is ask. What I'd like to do first is ask Constance and Mersha, maybe starting with Constance. Please introduce yourselves. Welcome. Thank you for waking up this early. I know I had to basically pull some big favors to get you here, but we do that all the time. And could you, Constance, start by introducing yourself, and then Mersha, tell us who you are, what you do, and Mersha will then follow.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you for your team for really recognizing me. My name is Constance Mohale, and I am a rural girl from the province of the Northwest in South Africa. I've been I don't know, I don't like this thing calling myself an activist, but because of my circumstances and my environment, I can't find an appropriate title for myself. So I'm a land activist because I come from families who were forcefully removed. I'm also a feminist because I come from a very patriarchal family and society and communities. So I happened to have opportunities of being exposed to information around activism, land reform, forced removals, and I joined social movements. I led one of the social movements called the Land Access Movement of South Africa. I think for 15 years I've been there. That's where I met all of you, Nancy, Meshia, and others. And then I went out because of this issue of class and gender and racism, whether it exists in social movement, it is real. And I really felt like I want to emancipate myself from being a social movement and classified, and wanted to join the private sector. I couldn't last. I stayed 8 months there, and it was just enough. I felt like I was choked. And I went back and started another Alliance for Rural Democracy. So that is where I am right now. Um, I was just a student I was just a student without any qualifications, but I managed to climb the ladder now. I'm now just doing masters, and for me, I like you, Nancy, because with you, I will feel myself. I don't want to talk about my credentials and my achievement, but I want to talk about my experience and be myself and be able to share who I am really. Thank you very much for having me in this show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Constance. Thank you. I have tears in my eyes already, and they're not. The tears are going to flow even more because Marsha, please, could you introduce yourself, talk about who you are and what you do? We have a bit of time, so you don't have to rush. It's great to have you, and tell us all the fantastic things you do so that people know who you are before we start. Go ahead.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Marsha Andrews. Connie's from the north of South Africa. I'm from the south of South Africa.
No.
But the two of us have quite a lot of commonalities, and our lives have crisscrossed very, very often, and still does. And there's a lot of bonds. I presently, I work also in the rural sector, as one can broadly say. I work with small-scale farmers, farm workers, fishers, small-scale producers, etc. in South Africa. I too I'll go a little bit further than Connie today in that I describe myself as a radical feminist. In the last days, I was in the feminist school, so I'm an African feminist, a very radical one, and I hold that title quite close to my heart and very dear to me. And like Connie, my role and my work in the sector is because of who I am and where I come from. I am the granddaughter of farm workers, and so I too have experienced quite a lot of evictions. I also grew up in District 6. And in the South African context, often because I have a fair skin, there's always a lot of confusion about who I am and what I am. But I've come to live with that because I've asserted myself within the movement of fighting racism, oppression, exploitation. And I have a very deep, deep commitment to working with rural women. And in that regard, a small vignette, because I'm going to talk about it a lot as we go in the program. One of the common threads between Connie and I is the formation of the Rural Women's Assembly. And so today, I think 10 years ago, it's almost 11 years this year now, Connie, isn't it? We were together in a little village in Limpopo somewhere, and all these women came together, and half of the time during that week we didn't sleep because we had to deal with a crisis. It was like birth pains that night of giving birth to a movement that still stands today. And today the Rural Women's Assembly has grown up. It's still I wouldn't say it is fully formed, but it is a movement that exists in 10 countries across the region. And it's a movement that doesn't claim to be feminist, but it's feminist in orientation. Because it's a difficult title to say we feminist, especially when you have a movement of over 100,000 members. And I think Connie with Lamosa and also with the Alliance for Rural Democracy would say it's very difficult to make the claim, especially when we're working with so many rural women in villages. It's not an NGO, we're dealing with movements. So how we orientate ourselves and position ourselves is slightly more complex. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Masha. Thank you. Yes, Rural Women's Assembly has been quite an amazing achievement. It is in 10 different countries across Southern Africa, including Mozambique, where Carmen is right now. Hi, Carmen. Glad you could join us. Thank you so much. I know you were here the other day, but could you please introduce yourself again to the audience? Do we have Carmen? Hi. Have I frozen? Letu?
We had her a few minutes ago.
I think she's frozen. Okay. That's okay. All right, that's fine. Okay, that's okay. We'll get her back. She was there, so we'll get her back. Okay, and then she'll introduce herself. So the theme of today is reimagining development. Huh? This is the theme for the festival.
Yes,
Carmen is back. So I'm going to.
Hello, everyone. Sorry.
Hi, that's okay. Hi, Carmen.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I was here like feeling very emotional after hearing to these two ladies and their introductions. And yes, I'm from Mozambique. I'm based in Mozambique, and I've been part of that fight actually. Despite I'm not consider myself as a rural woman or social activist or something. Over the last 20 years, I've been working in development sector, very close by to the rural women's. I'm one of the founder members of Rural Women's Association in Mozambique. I joined some of these meetings in the region. So it is really a pleasure and a privilege to join this group this morning, where we'll be sharing our experiences and what you have been doing over the last years. And I must say that after working in the field and be based there for so many years, I found myself like lost in the middle of the world, but in a very special space, because there you have a chance to learn. You have a chance to see and learn how to do things. And I must say that it impacted on my life as well, because after the first 4 years working from the field, I decided, I said, no, I need really to be better prepared to help these women in their fight. Then I went to study rural development as one of the as one of my specializations. And in doing so, I was trying to find, being woman, being feminist, I was trying to understand the dynamics and be better prepared in terms of having the theoretical tools to work close by with these women and try to understand dynamics, as well as learn how we can fight against these dynamics, this concept, this, you know. So it will be really good to be here. I'm sure that I will learn a lot throughout our conversation. And of course, I will be sharing what I know as well. Just to add a bit more in my intro, over the last 20 years, I've been working on topics, mostly sustainable livelihoods, agriculture, environment, climate change, active citizenship, and women's rights. So those are the topics I've been working almost over the last 20 years. And yeah, let's share, let's learn together, and let's see up to the end of this session if we have together find the clarity on how and where and from where we should start. Actually, we started, but it's mostly reflect and think of what we can do better. Thank you very much, Nancy.
Thank you, Carmen. Thanks. That's a great introduction. So the topic, the theme for today is reimagining development. And I wanted to ask you all to comment a little bit from your perspective, to comment, what does that mean? What does reimagining development, even if we question the issue, the term development at the same time, what does that mean from a rural women's perspective, from a perspective of rurality? Mersha, you've been in the feminist school, so I'm sure you've been thinking about these topics all week. So both some of the points that may have come out from the feminist school, but in fact, it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about that, and also then add on to what reimagining development looks like as we're talking from the perspective of rural women in the region. And I know you have experience and connections across the world. So you can include those points too, but from where you are at now, please, can you start?
So again, good morning to all the people who've joined the program as well, and to my sisters here. I think the topic, defending the commons, is also an important thread that runs through the work of the Rural Women's Assembly. So we have tried to build on the knowledge of rural women throughout this period, and to work to advance some of what rural women do already. And I wanted to start off this morning by making a quote or using a quote that comes from Amandla magazine. It's a left magazine here in South Africa, and it's also available electronically. And the heading says, "We cannot go back to normal because normal is the problem." I hope everyone's heard that, because I think within that is the essence of the idea that we have reached a particular crisis, a multidimensional crisis globally. And I think that this COVID pandemic is just, how shall I put it, is just a manifestation of the way in which the capitalist system, the way in which the commons have been attacked, the way in which the system that drives profit making has destroyed the food systems, have continued to want to grab land, grab seeds, grab people's indigenous knowledge, etc. And that's at the heart of the crisis. And we need to be much stronger and greater, put forward the articulation of what is wrong with the system. It's not simply about inequality. Of course, inequality is there. It's not simply about unemployment. It's not simply about poverty. It's also about the destruction of our ecological system, our food system, and so on. So the idea of defending the commons is quite central to anything that we do about reimagining the future. And this is, for me, quite critical. for the Rural Women's Assembly, we have begun to say that the issue of alternatives is quite central to the issue of feminism, because feminism is also an alternative. And we argue, as we've done in this past week in the school, that there's a symbiotic relationship. There is a relationship between building a different ideology and women challenging power, patriarchal power, the power in the village, the power in the system generally, and developing alternatives, different agroecology as one form of alternative, defending our seeds, defending our land, defending our forests. These are all transformative actions. So we see the link, because it is rural women who are at the forefront. I don't want to even use the word the soldiers in the battalion, no, because that's too masculine. But we are the activists, we are the guardians, we are there in the forefront of building the alternatives to land. It's building the alternatives to agroecology, the food systems, and so on. And we know that already in the last decade or more in Southern Africa, the agroecological movement has grown. The movement in defense of land has grown. The movement that says we should say no to the way in which our minerals are being grabbed from the bowels of our earth, etc. So this issue of alternatives then is central to building another vision. And we need to begin to unpack that alternatives. That's our challenge now, so that a new platform in defense of the commons is not a title only, but it talks about seed systems, that says no to Monsanto's GMO seeds, that says no to Syngenta, etc., and so on. So I start with that as my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Masha. You've brought up a lot of points, and particularly the question of food sovereignty, which is really very close, and where we know that sort of rural movements are really at the forefront of, and it hasn't taken the space it should have in our public policy and public discourses. And yet even then we know that, like, food, one of the reasons why agriculture is so subsidized is food was supposed to be even food self-sufficiency, let's say, as a national security issue in a very sort of, even in a very sort of like post-independence, post-Cold War kind of way, that's supposed to be a national strategic issue. So not only have we abandoned food security and food self-sufficiency, we even the notion of food sovereignty, which is again a different sort of set of ideas from food self-sufficiency. It's different from food security. Even that is not making its way, but we need to really push that issue because it is so vital to our ability to reimagine development, because to be dependent on the outside world, or to not be food self-sufficient, is really the hallmark of how it's impossible to then be autonomous and make your own decisions and even enjoy your right to self-determination. So that's my little comment there. But Constance, I'm going to bring you in on the same question to ask about reimagining development from the perspective of rural women, from where, or the work you've done with Land Access Movement of South Africa, LAMOSA, and with ARD, Alliance for Rural Democracy. What does it look like? What do we need to be thinking about? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy and the team. and the realization that there is a need, and it's in our face. We need to reimagine development. Why there's a need is because we recognize that the development is skewed. It is not inclusive, and I don't want to use English terms like inclusive, because it might be self-defeating, but we need to reimagine a development that puts gender at the center stage, a development that is where we see equal participation of people, women, men, people across classes, but also across race. So we see that the government has policies that sometimes are well-intended, but that are coming from above. And we need to start reimagining the vision from below. What is the vision from below? What is the women's vision of development? What is the ordinary peasant's vision of development? And make sure that we reach a middle ground in terms of what the future should be. So if you look at the challenges that that are there, I think we should start by the language that we use. So the language that we use is biased towards class. It's a class language. I'm not only talking around English, but I'm talking about if you look at the urbanization, who it favors, why is there a move for urbanization? If you look at the depletion of resources, the over-accumulation of a certain class at the expense, or a certain gender, or at the expense of the other, and who is at the bottom, rather, who's at the receiving end. And I would want to, when I begin to reimagine my future, I want to start by looking at the natural resources and the governance of the natural resources. The fact that land tenure in most of the rural sites is not secured, and the resources there are declared open access, and there is this marginalization and undermining of the rights of ordinary people. And that is why, as a result, everybody thinks they can just come and grab. They want to come and grab the natural resources, but also come and grab our labor, our reproductive rights, and also come and grab our bodies. So looking at the feminist, with a feminist gender, we need to start reimagining the future and making sure that we tackle this and we disrupt the dominant models of development that are portrayed in policy, and also investigate as to why the well-intended policy has brought about disappointing changes. It's not bringing about the change that we all are looking forward to. So we'll be looking at patriarchy as a system, but also I don't like us to leave to limit ourselves to patriarchy as well, but to also look at the social factors, all the social factors, including race. Let me stop there, and I look forward to deliberating more. Thanks.
Thanks, Constance. Throwing in the basket there with another big issue, which is land. And I think that when we talk about rural women, rurality, that is where the majority of our populations live, which is in the rural area, and their land developed and their livelihoods depend on their access to land, including rural women who do not have those automatic access to land. So I think that's really one of those things that we need to think about, how futures, South feminist futures and reimagining development need to construct a set of ideas around what land tenure and what land patterns need to be. As you were saying, Constance, the pretense that land is of no value and dispossessing people of their land, when we know that at the end of the day, it's probably the most valuable thing that exists, what's on the land because we survive on it, and what's beneath, because it's also a cause of much of our oppression as well. But Carmen, I'm going to ask you to answer that same question. Reimagining development, what does that make you think about? We've talked about food security, we've talked about land, we've touched a little bit on extractives. Also, Constance brought up the point of urbanization, that, you know, this reconstructing of the idea that it's everything, you know, even for Africa, oh, we're going to be an urban, all of us are going to be urban, when in fact we are in reality rural as countries. But in addition to any of those points, if you want to elaborate and give your own thoughts about reimagining development. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, those are really critical points here to reflect on. But I must say, like, reimagine development and looking to what have been said here, especially the role these women play in terms of managing these natural resources and produce food, among others. It's really time to bring them to be part of the decision-making process. In doing so, we need to value like the culture, the knowledge, the skills they have in doing things. Let's not forget the important role these women also play in their family in rural areas. Despite this is not officially, they are leading their families in terms of providing all types of services. So to do so, they need to have some kind of capacity, even it's not informal ways capacity. They really play an important role. Constance touched a bit on the language issues and the barriers sometimes the language play in all this process. Because to be part of some process, you need to be prepared to sit in these decision-making tables. You need to be able to discuss and argue and bring your points. So the point here is, how can we remove these rural women for the place they have been pushed to be and bring them to be part of decision making? How can we bring these women and empower them with the information they need to know about what's going on worldwide and what is behind all these decisions of urbanizations? I'm seeing that the discussion here is mostly about agriculture, but let's not forget that women are not playing an important role. Rural women in this regard, they are not playing an important role only in agriculture sector. So the point is, how do we prepare these women to really take their place and bring, you know, prepare these women in terms of value what they already have in terms of knowledge and experience, and bring up a bit of extra information, technology, and access to resources, especially because what's happening now, when I'm saying access, it's not the right to use. A good example that we had here is land, how they can have access to use and have power over that land, how they can make decisions about the work, because this starts in rural areas. Let's not forget, at least from African perspective, that these masculinities and patriarchal systems, even in rural areas, are pushing women to be in backside of things. They are part of the production. For example, they do the cropping, but when it comes to decide about these croppings, mostly from the market perspective, they don't have a voice. And many times they don't even have access to resources coming. In this case, I'm talking about financial resources coming from the selling of these products. And she was the one who was working there side by side with men in order to make things happen. So I think it's good to see, at least in Africa, the movement and things happening over the last years. So women's are better organized now. Being organized, it's really important because change requires organizations, change requires acting together, change requires raised voices. And if you are doing this together, for me, this is a good starting point. So reimagine development, meaning bring these women and listen to these women. So now it's the point of making that voice listening for those ones who take decision. It's about having them sitting in this decision making. For it's about design programs, design policies, design initiatives, having them sitting in that table. Doesn't matter the language. How can we have a woman speaking local language, raising her voice and capture everything she is saying, and have a woman speaking at the parliament in her local language? So this is possible. Let's do our part actually in terms of bring all these things like resources, technology, power in terms of access to money. Money is important. Let's not forget that. And make sure that we are part of this process. And this starts happening. And I'm sure that no one can stop this. So as an intro remarks, this is what I'd like to say, that decision making, information, power to join decision making, control, access over the resources. I'm not only talking about land. We have so many resources. Nasus mentioned extractive. We have forests in our countries, and women are leading the management of these resources. Even it's unofficially, they are already doing it. So how can we, you know, work with them to push them and bring them to the table? Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Carmen. Actually, you ended exactly where I was about to ask the next question, which was really about that issue of decision making, power, access to power and institutions. I know we talk about voice, but voice is not what we're. Voice is not the issue, actually. Voice is one thing, but some of us have a voice, but it's not changing anything anyway. So there's a limitation as to how much having a voice, which is one of those cliches that we use in the language that we use, has limitation. But actually being able to, as you say, be at decision-making tables, being able to influence what's happening, being able to make sure that whatever decisions are being made, your interests are the ones that the decision makers, if it's a them as, or even if it's ourselves, that the first thing they think about is, oh, what about we need to cater for these groups of people. I know it actually, even in, I think, I'm sure South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique are the same. You know, we have political parties that do tend to depend very much on rural votes. So it's not as if they don't think about rural people, but somehow the relationship between this sort of the politics that we have and what is really people's rights and rights to self-determination, rights to define their future, particularly for women, that's not really quite coming through. And there's still laws that are coming through around land that are really looking much more at the dispossession of rural communities' land. So I would just like to ask, well, Constance, let me start, because you are Alliance for Rural Democracy, about those some of the thoughts around being able to access decision-making and places of decision-making, and sort of building our own power to be able to challenge the powers that be, and force and get them to do the and get them to represent the interests of rural communities in genuine ways, not in is it patrimonial? is that the word? Paternal, the paternalistic relationship between people in power and people in rural areas. I think that maybe is what I was talking about earlier, and that has to change as well.
Yeah. So thanks, Nancy. I think me and you, we are not morning people, so terminology is just escape in the brain during this time of the day. And I wanted to speak about terminologies and the way it could be used to defeat the struggle. And also not only terminologies, but also the definitions of those terminologies. And when you talk about the way people are organized in terms of making sure that they occupy the spaces of power, the thing is, in South Africa today, we have a 50-50 policy in the political parties, and we've got more women represented in parliament. Yet, the kind of change, because it is not about the number of people and the gender of those people or the race of the people, but it's about the change we want to see. So the change we want to see, why are we not getting there? Why, even though we have a democratic constitution, we have a democratic country, and I want to talk about this term, democracy. So I think the way Carmen has placed it, that we need, I mean, women are leaders in their own right. They make decisions every day on what their kids are going to eat, what they are going to wear, what time they're going to sleep. So they make those decisions, and each and every one of us, irrespective of the position or privilege we occupy, we make those leadership decisions every day. Yet, there is this a tendency of undermining that leadership value when we do policy, of harvesting and harnessing those, because they might not be, when you interpret it from one language to the other, they might be watered down. But yes, we understand that those people, the reason that they are surviving, irrespective of that they are poor, they don't have resources, they don't have land, they don't have water, it is because they make leadership decisions every day. And that is one thing that when we reimagine the future, we should start harnessing. The other thing, when I talk of democracy and terminologies and definitions, our understanding and the general understanding of democracy is that people will go and vote for a party of brighter colors, and then sit down and wait for another 5 years to come and vote. And as to what happens in that 5 years, nobody cares to know, or nobody cares to let people know what is happening. So Parliament will be making ridiculous laws that are regressive, that are aiming to dispossess people more, aiming to undermine and marginalize women more, aiming to make us subjects. But people don't know. You see women organized in women's Congress, ANC Women's League, women's whatever. But people don't talk about this thing. People talk about gender-based violence, and she said it's a very, very big issue. But that is a symptom of it's a symptom of a disease that is already there. You understand? So if you don't make laws that empowers women to be self-sufficient, to be able to provide for themselves and for their decisions to add value to their lives, and you think you can make things for them, and because they are kids, they need to be nurtured, they are fragile, and yet you think gender-based violence will go, then perhaps we need a new set of analysts, critical thinkers, young people, or not even young people, young fresh minds who will challenge our way of organizing. Probably our way of organizing is in a way of coming together in a group and being elected as a chairperson, and then people don't know what happens to the movement. The movement gets to do activities that are exciting, but as to where are the resources, who resources, and also valuing our own contribution as a resource, because our own contribution of making time to be in this movement, our own contribution to the vision of this movement is underscored, undermined. So people think women can come together in the hall, sing in praises for some leader. But when coming to real fundamental decision making, we are being left out, and we are aware. I mean, and probably we have allowed that to happen with us for a long time. And at my age, I still cannot be seen to be a complainant on the issue, because I was a participant in this thing. But probably if we can groom a young feminist movement which is going to critically challenge the principle of democracy, the principle of inclusive. If you're saying inclusive, who are you including? Are you including me in your thing, or how does it work? Who's including who? You see, the principle of diversity. So if you say you got diverse women from backgrounds, what are you really meaning if you say diversity? Because that's a problem, because diversity doesn't always mean gender equality, that doesn't mean equity, doesn't mean equal, participation and equal recognition. So what do we mean when we say diversity? So I think we need to revisit the terminology. Probably we need to come and also create our own spaces, because if we are saying we need to be included in decision-making spaces, those spaces were never meant for us. They were meant for this patriarchy. They were meant for them. They were I'm creating an empire for my future. So if you want me to include you in your empire, that means you want me to make you a favor. And that is how I feel. I feel like movements, labor movements, women's movements, we need to change the way we organize. We need to start creating our own spaces and participate in it. So, Meshia, you remember when there was a land summit and there was no inclusive voice in the panel. You'll see minister of this and that who is a man, minister of this and that who is a man. And we said, let's do our alternative. And that is where I see people doing alternative spaces. And I remember where the early days in 2005, when we said, let's do our alternative space. Let's do our alternative summit, where women will sit as a judge and say what is wrong and right, where women will judge themselves, where they will make their own mistakes, because women are also not homogeneous. We are also having our own baggage, but we will have our own spaces where we interrogate ourselves, rather than strive to be included, where we really don't. The part of the original map didn't include us. The original architecture didn't include us. So we are just the other. We are just okay, we forgot them. Let's get the other two women too. So let's the other black. So we need to disrupt that narrative and make sure that we create our own spaces. We organize differently. We listen more to our own voices. And yes, we are weak, but we blow our own horn. And then they will start turning their heads and say, there's a noise happening somewhere. Let's go there. And they will be the ones who will include, not the other way around. So that is why I think my mind is getting frustrated with the way the policy making and decision making has been unfolding in South Africa, in the region. We have been trying to chase around the African Union when it's meeting to go and make noise to say we are still here, don't forget us, and scream. But nothing is happening. No real change is happening. And yes, there are some progressive policies which were supposed to bring real change, but there are some elements of corruption and people who are just diverting the thing. And how do we really fight those elements, and how do we make sure that we come up with a vision that is going to make sure that everybody is there, it's not included, is there, is part of the planning, the architecture, and the implementation. And when there's something going wrong, we can together own up and say we didn't make the right decision because we were there. So thank you very much.
Masha, you can carry on from there very, very easily. I don't need to say anything. Please pick up from the points that Constance has raised and your thoughts around it.
I want to pick up the points that Constance has made, but I also want to put 2 or 3 other points linked to the issue of the commons. So I agree with Connie that in the region, you know, especially rural women and rural people are the kind of voting cattle, and they get pulled, drawn out, bussed out, wheelbarrowed out when votes are required, and so on. And I agree with Connie that we need to disrupt the system. But this is why I made the point earlier that we need to begin to understand not only that we are dealing with a system of patriarchy, but we're also dealing with a system of capitalism. And therefore, we need to be challenging this. Otherwise, we will sit at their table and we will like whatever radical. If we see it here in South Africa, you have the Red Berets that came out all fire and brimstone. You know, they're going to disrupt everything. And today they are inside the parliament. Even if they are in red overalls, they are still inside the same parliament, making and singing to the same hymn book and having to pray from the same sheets, etc. So nothing's changed. They're wearing red overalls, but they're sitting in the parliament. They haven't shifted power. That's the issue that I think Connie's talking about. And so I agree with her that we need to begin to look at how do we challenge power, and how do we raise the consciousness, reimagine a different way of building a society. Because the present system of democracy is based on every 4 years you come to vote, and then you can have Trump, irrespective, you know, you can have Trump, or you can have Trump light, or you can have Trump heavy, Trump with sugar free, but you're still gonna have Trump. So for me, it is more than simply trying to change the chairs. We have to rebuild, destroy a system, and rebuild and reimagine what that system can be. And this is particularly critical for women to begin to do that. I also think one of the points we make in the Rural Women's Assembly, and I want to make it here as well, that we're also very conscious that often rural women in particular are also the custodians of patriarchal culture. You know, Nancy's grandmother will tell her, Nancy, you're not going out with that short skirt, or you're not going to go out and live with that man. He's got to marry you, or this or that, or you cannot express your sexuality, and so on. So this is all the way in which often our society and the patriarchs have passed this whip to women themselves, to whip other women into place. So we also need to work at challenging the way in which this has happened. So I agree with that completely. I wanted to talk 2 more points about the development path. So I'm going to shift a little because they are related, and particularly here in Southern Africa, the development path is an extractivist model, a model that says, let's dig up whatever we can in Mozambique, in South Africa, all the platinum, in Zimbabwe, all the gold, and let's ship it out, dig it up, ship it out. And that's the development path. And whatever is in the way of the development path and the development model must be moved. So people's land, the oceans, the fishing rights of people, all this doesn't matter, because according to our development model, we've got to take up and this is what one of our ministers say, take up what God has given to us and ship it to China, or ship it to wherever we're going to ship it. And there we are going to, that's how we're going to earn the revenue, etc., etc. So the model of the development is also what we need to change. And part of that extractivist model is agriculture. because we have an extractivist agricultural model where the model is have sugarcane fields as much as you like, have wheat fields, wine, etc., etc. And land in productive land must be used for that model, because we've got to, again, ship up the wine, the grapes, the fruit to sell over wherever we're going to sell it, so that we make revenue. And it is these models of this development path that has created the inequality, because we're shipping out the wealth, we're shipping out the resources, we're destroying our own resources, and we are sending it elsewhere. And we benefit little, because we buy back the steel, we buy back the platinum. We are not, there isn't an equal relationship between the North and the South. This development model doesn't create a transfer of skills. It doesn't create equity. It continues to underdevelop Africa. It continues to impoverish Africa. It continues to make Congo ungovernable, because it wants to take the wealth of Congo and ship it elsewhere. So this is also part of what we have to challenge, this development model. And I think, for me, if we don't, because it's linked to power and it's linked to how we begin to change society, etc. The last point I want to make on this issue is to come back to the question of defense of the commons, and to look at the issue of climate. Because part of what I don't want us to also forget is that Nancy asked us to say something about climate justice, etc. Am I correct, Nancy?
Yeah, absolutely. I did. So
one of the things that I think is very critical for us to also look at is that we have to challenge mainstream agriculture. Mainstream agriculture today, particularly the models of agribusiness, creates 14% of the greenhouse gases globally. Cattle, dairy, take a lot of, create a lot of the greenhouse gases that we have in the world, and especially in the North. And they are subsidized to have cattle. They are subsidized to produce dairy, the entire North. And so that's also part of what we must challenge. Who are the polluters? You know, and our region, our poor Africa, with its different agricultural model and so on, in many cases, we are having to bear the burden of the fact that we have heating Africa. Africa is going to bear the brunt already of an overheated continent. We're already seeing more and more desertification. Africa is becoming hotter. So again, despite the fact that we are the ones who is the smallest producers of greenhouse gases, we are going to bear the brunt of this unequal system. This unequal system that we are having to live with. So I put that in the center, because part of what we need to also say, we need to be vigilant about what our governments are saying. They are not defending Africa as a planet, I mean, as a continent in this COP negotiations. They are accepting that people can dump on us. We can take all we can be the dumping ground of the rest of the world. So I want to say these are critical issues that should also be in our conversations. I agree with some of the speakers here who says, you know, we need to be fighting at so many levels to defend our integrity, to defend our seeds, to defend our indigenous knowledge, our biodiversity. All these are critical issues if we are going to be building real alternatives. And for me, the issue of the forests, as you say, is critical, because our forests are being destroyed all over, like in Latin America, also been destroyed, so that we can be pumping out pulp to the north. So this extractivist model linked to climate issues is quite critical. My last point that I think we should discuss is the fact that we need a just transition. And a just transition is not simply about mining, it's also firstly about agriculture. Because if we're demanding a just transition, it is about an alternative agricultural model where rural women across the global south, and especially African women, who are the producers of food, the guardians of our seeds, and the defenders of our diversity, etc., must be at the center of that just transition. So for me, these are the key elements that we need to be putting forward, changing the narratives, changing the debate, so that we can be putting these questions at the center. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes or a little bit more before we wind up, and then we'll have the poem. So a couple of gems there: Trump light, Trump with sugar, Trump Trump heavy, Trump light, Trump, but it's still going to always be Trump in terms of the kind of system that we are living under. Catherine has in the Q&A here, one person posted in the Q&A, other are posting in the chats. But she is putting up another point, which I think it's quite important to raise in this discussion, and then I'll ask Carmen to comment on that in addition for about 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap up. Kath is saying the repression and murder of people defending the commons seems a little hopeless. I think despairing. We know as collectives have achieved major triumphs in defending their land and resource against mining, logging, monocropping, and big agriculture. But these triumphs are always at risk of being rolled back. For example, Holobeni, I know I haven't pronounced that properly, and the defenders are eventually just killed. And that's really like, this is, I think, the point that at the end of the day, in addition to all of these violations and injustices, the question of violence and the question of violence is really where we also need to, that at the end of the day, we can, if that's what's required, then the other side are quite happy to be very, very, very violent and very, very happy to kill us. So I think the question of thinking about power is also the violence that we need to be confronting alongside that. I don't have an answer because I'm a bit of a the violence and the fear of violence, etc. But I think that tells us we can't underestimate the kind of challenge we have. And Carmen, if you could just talk a little bit about that, maybe also from the Mozambican perspective, because there's a whole new conflict happening in northern Mozambique. But I know also we've got women's movements who've been doing a lot of work around issues of violence, but especially in the context of defending rights. And I think the violence, the gender-based violence that we talk about within the home, domestic violence, is not disassociated with the kind of with violence in defending the commons. That's the same violence because it's about control. But Carmen, maybe you can talk a little bit to that. And also we had started on the small question of engagement in politics and decision making. Masha and Constance took us through a whole load of things, and we're landing with you, and then we'll wind up in order to have the performance. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I think there are a few critical things like my colleagues just raised while presenting, and some of the things I try to catch is how these patriarchy tools has been used, to manipulate women's even when they are sitting in decision making process. This is very serious, and it's really common to see women's fighting against each other, because of the mindset. There is a lot that needs to be done here, and all of us should be part, because it's not about sitting, as Constance was saying. We have the same here. We have a good proportion of women sitting at parliament, but they're almost there sitting. What they are changing, which role they are playing there. So there is a work need to be done here. And the second point I would like really to emphasize is we cannot lead that change and leave men aside. We should find creative ways. A good example, for example, is these forums that we organize, and we invite them to be part of the process, which is good way, but we should also be part of the forums they are organizing as well. I think in doing both at same time, we'll be able to share our knowledge, capacity, and influence. Influencing is really important. But again, I'm coming back to my previous point. To influence, you need to be prepared to do so. If we are losing focus, and our minds already very well, settled based on education, culture, and all these old values, doesn't help us much in terms of bringing that change. Another thing I would like to emphasize is how can we bring young people to this change? How can we, start, because we have this in Mozambique, we have these influencers, the elders, special women's that sit with girls and prepare them for future. Is a sort of traditional class. The girl, when you reach certain age, you need to go and attend this class for a month or more. And during these traditional sessions, they prepare you for the future. Actually, they train you how to behave as part of society. I think this is an important target group. I've done some of this work before. At the time we were discussing HIV and AIDS and other impacts, and the importance of bringing and sending girls to school. Of course, with communities, it takes time, and they want really to see practical examples of change. You won't be speaking and saying things without really showing them the advantage of changing, of doing things differently. The religious leaders, the education system, there is a lot that needs to be done here in preparation for future strong women that will be sitting in these forums and really playing a role that is expected, because it's not all about numbers, but it's about really bringing change. And power, it will be always there. The way, like, it's not about elections only, because we have women from our communities elected. While they go and sit there, they can't do much actually. So the power is a very serious issue here, that we need to really work with that women and empower her to be able really to lead that change. And when it comes to decision making international, especially touching on climate forums and climate related issues, unfortunately, the language and the way this issue is being guided, especially led by northern countries, doesn't allow us to really bring in the table our knowledge and the really strugglings we are facing in our country. And this is at some point linked with the dependence we have with these countries. Talking specifically for Mozambique, about 40% of our budget comes from these countries. We are still relying on receiving, international aid to be able to implement actions in our country. So if someone is giving you money, that one will dictate how to use that money and how to apply that money. So if we continuing, not being organized, here I'm bringing the point of organization. how we organize ourselves. We see, of course, there is still a long way to go, but we have great results achieved by these women's movements in the regions and worldwide. There are change that we were able to bring as a result of being organized in a forum, as a result of organized these discussions, is a starting point. There's still a long way to go, but this is a starting point. Going to the question of violence and situation, yes, of course, if you are corrupted and if you are, the money you receive, there is no, like, the accountability systems are not in place, and here I'm bringing all population, women's and plus everyone, at least from my country perspective. How do we make our governance, our government, and our politicians accountable? Because even the money is not enough. How are we using the money we have? Uh, Marsha touched in the point that's happening in many African countries in terms of depending on China. I won't mention names, but there are countries who are really selling everything to China. And this is a result of the easy money they're getting. No accountability systems, you just get the money. But China has their clear agenda and is taking advantage of the situation our countries are currently. And like, going to the example of Cap Delgado, yes, this is the point. The resources are there. We, like, it was a really a quiet place, and everything was well up to the point we discover oil and gas, and everything started from there. And people, I was there just 2 weeks ago, and people are being displaced for their land. And that land, it's clear that they won't go back to that land. They have been allocated new land elsewhere. What is the meaning of that? So the land where we have resources, they won't go back there. So there is a clear agenda on how to explore the resources there. And who is doing that? Who is doing that? At some point, it's ourselves as Mozambicans who are doing that. So it's really a very sensitive topic that starts with us, in which women can really play an important role. And here I'm bringing women who have access to knowledge. I'm bringing us, at least us, and other women who have access to knowledge, access to information, access to traditional culture and values. Some of us, we went through these values and we are able to challenge these values. That's why we are here, calling ourselves as feminists, and joining these kind of discussions, bringing what we know. Are we doing the same in our communities? Are we working with these elders, ladies who train these girls? Are we going back to our communities? Are we doing our part in starting this change? Because I think we should do both. We should influence a decision-making process, but we should go back as we are from here, as we know what are the topics discussed in these traditional lessons and trainings and so on, traditional reads and so on. Are we joining these forums and bring change there? Are we showing the communities the advantage of have a girl who went to school, who is empowered today, who is joining? I think we must rethink, because yes, we should join this global forum decision making first, but we should go back to the place we prepare the women's of tomorrow, starting now with young girls that will enter to this traditional training at the end of this year. We should go now and work with this, because there are different front lines here. We should act. We cannot just act in one. As I said, it's about mindset of women's as well. Of course, there is patriarchal systems. Men are taking advantage of these systems, but I look at us having additional responsibility. Don't want to undermine the efforts women's are doing, are working really hard. We have these two ladies here for what we are here today. They are trying to run everywhere, joining and doing difference. But how many of us are doing that? So change starting, it's many times it's easier to ask others to change, but forgetting that change starts with us. So I think here it's good. So feminists is really a good place for us to reflect about these issues. It's coming just as an additional effort for what we have been doing. It's great to see an amazing group of women's we gathered along this week, all of us bringing this amazing experience. What about, let's see if COVID allow to have this forum in a rural community, for example, in local language, and sharing and learning from what is happening there. Those are a few insights that I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Thank you. Wow. We have to end now, but I really thank you so much for addressing the issue of reimagining development. Mersha, Constance, Carmen, it was a very short conversation, but you really put, I think, so many of the issues on the table. Anybody who's listening to that will be like, you know, a lot of the key points that needed to be thought about have been touched on, that we need to reflect on further in terms of what a reimagined development looks like. So I can't do that much of summarizing, because I think there was quite a lot, and I'm worried about losing the focus. But I think what's important is that the question of rural development, rurality, self-determination, what rights to development look like in this kind of environment, just transition, and how do we then also empower in the sense of how do we become empowered in the sense of making sure that having a seat at the table is not performative. It's something that translates into real change. There's questions of more power over the way natural resources are used, and the way women's labor is exploited and rewarded in order to actually feed us all. And those issues of food sovereignty. But I've taken all the notes. I just can't articulate it as well as I would like to. But thank you. I think you've really got us onto a perfect day. We've got a session following this one, and then we'll have a plenary, and then 2 more sessions, and then we're going to be closing our festival. So I'm so glad we were able to have your voices here. Thank you very much. And I have to introduce our next artist, who is Wangui. Are you online? Are you there? Can we hear you?
Yes, hi.
Hi. Would you like to introduce yourself? Just to add any comments, a couple of minutes, and then we'll go into your performance, and then we'll wind up the session.
Okay. So do I also do an introduction to the piece?
I think it would be nice for us to know what the piece is, yes.
Cool. So
that might help a little bit. And so who you are and what the piece is, thank you.
Awesome. So good morning, everybody, or good whatever time it is. My name is Wangui Wakamonji. I'm based in East Africa, and my work explores how to heal colonial traumas of the past and the present, and how to build new, old, regenerative realities for both the present and the future. And I ground my work in indigenous knowledges from this continent, from Africa, primarily, drawing from different cultures and different philosophies. So the work that I am presenting today is called Groove Tenders. And it's a meditation on what do we do with the torn fabrics, the grooves, the cracks of this world. And so it's an invitation to think about healing and creating and learning from life's insistence on living, on continuing to live. And it's different from the idea of making do with whatever lot we have. Rather, it's an invitation to make and to make life live, to make life sing, as the poet Michere Githai Mugo invites us. And the idea of adding beauty to life, adornment as making life live. I think a lot about regeneration, which I theorize as three things: preventing death, healing dis-ease, and adding life. And the sovereignty that we also need to be able to do all of these things, both individually and in collectives, in community. And think a lot about tending and care and the skills that we need to reclaim, revalorize, and expand in order to be able to build new worlds. Final two things that I'll say is I focus a lot on the body and the spirit. I often say that I think we've been decolonizing our minds for the past 60 years, and I don't know that much has changed. I think we need to move our struggles to the body and to the spirit, and not only to decolonize the body and decolonize the spirit, but also to re-indigenize the body and re-indigenize the spirit. So this comes through also in the piece. The song that I sing in the piece is a gift from a garden that I had a relationship with while I was studying for my master's. And so thinking a lot about how do we build these new worlds that we want to build, that we want to live in? How do we both imagine them and then start to live them right now in the present? And practices build worlds. Value-based practices build worlds, and practices involve our body, involve our emotions, involve our spirits. And in that sense, it's also a feminist struggle because it brings back and says, well, no, the mind, this hierarchy of the mind over the body, over the spirit, over emotions, and therefore the assigning of certain people as being deviant because they know through the body, they know through emotions, they know through the spirit, and this including women, queer folks, indigenous people, rural people, urban poor people, is false. That hierarchy is false. So correcting that a bit. Yeah, so that's an introduction to the piece.
Yakipotea mengine, yajitokeza njia. Yakipotea mengine, yajitokeza njia. Yakipotea mengine, yajitokeza njia. Ipo hapo, ipo hapo, ipo hapo, ipo hapo, ipo hapo, ipo hapo, ipo hapo. Imagine winning. Imagine this winning. Is your sacred task. This is your sacred task. My sacred task, to know the wound so I can know it healed. Was that the picture I turned to look at when they asked me, if they'd asked me, while in my mother's womb, what I had hurried on here to this plane to do? I would have turned and seen it clearly. The colors are crisp where they need to be and soft where they're best soft, complementing each other, side by side, tension and release, rupture and repair. Not a world where monsters are banished, such that we're afraid to even imagine them when they continue to live amongst us. No, not a sanitized world. A world that knows what to do with her grooves and cracks. A world which grooves as part of her being. A world where skilled groove tenders rejoin what is broken, and we all admire the repaired kintsugi. A world where all new cracks crack open our curiosity as to what new life intended to spring forth and found herself blocked perhaps. So we move the stones aside for that medicine to flow to those who need it, and no longer poison they who carried it. Prophets, diviners, rock readers, plant speakers, healers of all sorts. Dream catchers, song tellers, sound makers, groove artists of all kinds. Painters, seed whisperers, animal listeners, kitchen alchemists, life lovers of all designs. We all healers again, making medicine that flows for all, no longer hindered and festering, not healing even us. This world is not one where there is no wounding and wounds, but where wounding and wounds are not our mode of being and operation. Healing and medicine are.
Oh, thank you so much. That was so beautiful. And it's perfect for our topic today, perfect for where we would like to have ended this discussion, that reimagining development is about healing, and that the path has always been there. So to my wonderful, wonderful sisters, first of all, we carry each other all the way. Thank you for being here, Mersha, Carmen, Constance. Thank you, Angui, for such a beautiful piece of art. We are carrying that smile at the end into the next session, into the rest of the day, into the weekend. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Enjoy your day. In love, solidarity, power, joy, and now healing, where the list is getting longer and longer. Thank you very much, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Amanda.
This is the love side. Love, love, love.